My name is Margaret Thompson, and I'm 53 years old. Standing in this upscale jewelry store in downtown Chicago, my hands trembled as I held an $8,000 receipt. The weight of what just happened crashed over me like a tidal wave. My son David walked toward the exit, his words echoing in my ears. "Mom, you pay, we'll wait in the car." Behind him, my daughter-in-law Jessica clutched the expensive necklace and earring set I had just purchased. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound ever could. Before I share this painful journey with you, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Please hit that like button if you've ever felt manipulated by someone you trusted, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that matter. What I'm about to tell you changed everything I thought I knew about family, love, and trust. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. 6 months earlier, everything seemed perfect in my world. I had recently retired from my nursing career of 30 years and was looking forward to spending more time with my family. That's when David brought home Jessica Walsh, a 28-year-old woman who would soon become my daughter-in-law and the architect of my financial destruction. The first time I met Jessica was at a family dinner I had prepared at my house. She arrived wearing a simple sundress and carrying a bouquet of flowers, immediately complimenting everything from my home's decor to the aroma of my pot roast. "Mrs. Thompson, David has told me so much about your cooking," she said with a bright smile that seemed to light up the entire room. "This smells absolutely incredible. You must give me the recipe." Throughout that evening, Jessica displayed what I now recognize as carefully calculated charm. She showed genuine interest in our family photos, asking detailed questions about each picture and listening intently to the stories behind them. When I mentioned my late husband Robert's military service, she placed her hand over her heart and thanked him for his sacrifice, even though he had passed away 3 years earlier. She offered to help with the dishes, insisting despite my protests, and even remembered to ask about my neighbor's recent surgery that I had mentioned in passing. Jessica shared what I later learned were fabricated stories about her difficult childhood. She spoke of growing up in foster care, never having a stable home or a mother figure to guide her. "I've always dreamed of having a real family," she told me with tears welling in her eyes. "David is so lucky to have someone like you who clearly loves him unconditionally." The way she looked at me when she said those words made me feel like I was the most important person in the world to her. David was completely smitten, hanging on her every word and constantly seeking her approval. When she complimented the wine I had selected, he beamed with pride as if he had chosen it himself. When she laughed at his jokes, even the ones that weren't particularly funny, he seemed to grow taller in his chair. It was clear that my son had fallen hard for this charming young woman, and I wanted nothing more than to see him happy. However, even during that first meeting, I noticed small inconsistencies in Jessica's stories that planted seeds of doubt in my mind. She mentioned attending college in California, then later referred to a professor from a university in Texas. When I asked about the discrepancy, she quickly explained that she had transferred schools, but something about her explanation felt rehearsed. She claimed to work as an administrative assistant at a small marketing firm, but her knowledge of office procedures seemed limited when we discussed workplace experiences. As the weeks progressed, Jessica's manipulation tactics became more sophisticated. She began calling me regularly, asking for advice on everything from career decisions to what gifts to buy David for his birthday. She created a false sense of intimacy by sharing secrets about her relationship with my son, positioning herself as the daughter I never had. "I hope you don't mind me saying this," she would often begin, "but I feel closer to you than I ever did to any of the foster mothers I lived with." During these conversations, Jessica skillfully gathered information about my financial situation. She asked seemingly innocent questions about my pension, whether I owned my house outright, and if I had any investments. When I mentioned that Robert's life insurance policy had left me comfortable in retirement, I noticed how her interest seemed to sharpen, though she maintained her caring facade throughout our discussions. The red flags were there from the beginning, but I ignored them because I wanted so desperately to believe that David had found someone wonderful. Jessica's expensive taste in restaurants and clothing seemed inconsistent with her claimed modest background as an administrative assistant. She drove a luxury car that she explained was a gift from a previous employer, and her jewelry collection appeared far too extensive for someone living paycheck to paycheck. When I gently questioned these contradictions, David would immediately come to her defense, explaining away every inconsistency with elaborate stories that Jessica had obviously prepared him to share. 3 months into their relationship, David surprised everyone by proposing to Jessica with my grandmother's engagement ring, a family heirloom that had been passed down through 3 generations. Jessica's tears of joy seemed genuine as she accepted, and I found myself caught up in the excitement of planning my son's wedding. What I didn't realize was that this engagement marked the beginning of a carefully orchestrated campaign to drain my life savings. Jessica immediately insisted on my help with every aspect of the wedding planning, claiming that she had never had a mother figure to guide her through such an important milestone. "I want this to be perfect," she would say, "and I need someone with your wisdom and experience to help me make the right choices." Her requests always came wrapped in emotional appeals that made it impossible for me to refuse without feeling heartless. The first significant financial request came when Jessica found what she claimed was the perfect wedding venue. The historic mansion she had chosen required a deposit of $5,000, money that the young couple claimed they didn't have available immediately. "We'll pay you back as soon as we get our tax refunds," David promised, but I could see the desperation in both their eyes. Against my better judgment, I wrote the check, telling myself that it was a gift to help my son start his marriage on the right foot. The dress shopping experience should have been a joyful mother and daughter-in-law bonding activity, but it became another exercise in financial manipulation. Jessica tried on dozens of dresses, rejecting each one for various reasons until we reached the most expensive boutique in the city. There, she found a $3,000 designer gown that she claimed was the one. Standing in front of the mirror, she began crying as she told me, "I never had a mother to shop for a wedding dress with me. This feels like such a special moment between us. How could I say no to that?" As the wedding planning continued, Jessica's demands escalated with each passing week. The flowers needed to be upgraded to premium arrangements costing an additional $2,500 because the photos will last forever, and we want everything to look beautiful. The catering menu required enhancement to include lobster and filet mignon because family deserves the best, and we want to honor the memory of your husband with a celebration he would have been proud of. The photography package needed to be expanded to include an engagement session and wedding day preparations because these are the memories we'll treasure for our entire lives. Each request came with emotional manipulation that made refusal seem cruel and selfish. Jessica would often break down in tears, explaining how she had dreamed of a perfect wedding her entire life but never thought it would be possible given her difficult background. David, completely under her influence, would pressure me to agree to each expense, reminding me that this was his only wedding and that I had the means to make it special. The financial strain began to show in my bank accounts as I dipped deeper and deeper into my retirement savings. The $10,000 I had initially budgeted for wedding expenses quickly grew to $25,000, then $35,000. When I expressed concern about the mounting costs, Jessica would remind me that she was now family and that families support each other during important milestones. Jessica's isolation tactics became apparent as she created drama with my longtime friends who questioned the wedding expenses. She would misinterpret innocent comments as personal attacks, then retreat to David with tears and claims that my friends didn't accept her. Gradually, I found myself defending Jessica against people who had known and loved me for decades, creating rifts in relationships that had sustained me through my husband's death and other difficult times. The manipulation reached its peak when Jessica claimed that her estranged family members might attend the wedding, requiring additional security and upgraded accommodations. Of course, these family members never materialized, but by then I had already committed to thousands more in unnecessary expenses. Every conversation about money ended with Jessica's tears and David's angry defense of his fiancée, making me feel like the villain for questioning expenses that were rapidly consuming my life savings. The wedding was beautiful, and for one perfect day, I allowed myself to believe that all the money had been worth it to see my son so happy. However, within 2 weeks of their return from their honeymoon in Europe, another trip I had helped finance, the real systematic financial abuse began in earnest. Jessica's first post-wedding emergency involved a supposed identity theft that had compromised her bank accounts. She called me sobbing, explaining that someone had stolen her personal information and opened credit cards in her name. The bank says it could take months to resolve this, and we need $1,500 for legal fees to fight this properly, she explained through tears. I'm so embarrassed to ask, but you're the only family I have now. The money was supposedly for an attorney who specialized in identity theft cases, but when I offered to speak with the lawyer directly, Jessica explained that he preferred to work only through his clients for confidentiality reasons. Within a month, another financial crisis emerged. Jessica claimed that their current apartment had become unsafe after a break-in in their building, and they needed to move immediately to protect their safety and start their family planning in a secure environment. The new apartment required a security deposit and first month's rent totaling $5,000, money they promised to repay within 3 months once Jessica's identity theft case was resolved and she could access her accounts again. I provided the money immediately, horrified at the thought of my son and daughter-in-law living in danger. The employment manipulation began subtly but escalated quickly. Jessica claimed that her workplace had become hostile after she had reported sexual harassment by her supervisor. She explained that the stress was affecting her health and her marriage, and that she needed to quit immediately to protect her well-being. I know this puts financial pressure on us, but my mental health has to come first, she explained, positioning herself as the victim of circumstances beyond her control. For the next several months, I found myself paying their rent and utilities while Jessica allegedly searched for the right opportunity that would value her skills and treat her with respect. The medical fraud began with vague complaints about fatigue and mysterious symptoms that doctors couldn't diagnose. Jessica spent weeks visiting specialists, each of whom supposedly recommended expensive treatments that weren't covered by their insurance. She needed money for holistic therapies, nutritional supplements, and alternative treatments that promised to address the root causes of her illness. When I suggested that she seek a second opinion from conventional doctors, she explained that traditional medicine had failed her and that she needed to explore all options to regain her health. Over 3 months, I paid nearly $4,000 in supposed medical expenses for treatments that I later learned were spa services and luxury wellness retreats. The educational scam represented the pinnacle of Jessica's manipulative creativity. She announced that she had been accepted into an exclusive business certification program that would guarantee her placement in high-paying marketing positions. The program required immediate payment of $4,000 in tuition, but Jessica assured me that graduates typically secured jobs paying $60,000 or more annually. This is our chance to finally become financially independent, she explained. Once I complete this program, we'll be able to pay you back everything we owe and support ourselves completely. The urgency in her voice and David's enthusiastic support convinced me to liquidate part of my investment portfolio to cover the tuition costs. Throughout this period, David's behavior toward me changed dramatically. Where he had once been respectful and considerate, he became increasingly aggressive when I hesitated to provide money for Jessica's latest crisis. He would accuse me of being selfish and remind me that I had more money than I could ever spend, while his wife suffered. When I tried to discuss budgeting or suggested that they seek financial counseling, David would become angry and threatening, sometimes hanging up the phone or leaving my house in a rage. Jessica would later call to apologize for his behavior, explaining that the financial stress was affecting his mental health and that he was just worried about taking care of his wife. The promises of repayment became increasingly vague and distant. Initially, Jessica had committed to specific timelines for returning the money, but as the amounts grew larger, her explanations became more elaborate and the promised repayment dates kept moving further into the future. She would reference pending insurance settlements, expected bonuses, or family inheritances that would solve all their financial problems, but none of these windfalls ever materialized. When I pressed for more concrete repayment plans, Jessica would become emotional and remind me that family members don't keep score with each other. By the end of their first year of marriage, I had provided over $20,000 to support David and Jessica's lifestyle. My retirement accounts had been significantly depleted, I had taken on credit card debt for the first time in my adult life, and my monthly budget had become impossibly tight. Yet every time I considered refusing additional requests for money, Jessica would present a new crisis that seemed to require immediate attention, and David would pressure me to help his wife through another difficult situation. The jewelry store incident that would finally open my eyes to the extent of Jessica's manipulation began with another tearful phone call about a supposed tragedy. Jessica claimed that her grandmother's jewelry, the only items she had to remember her deceased family member, had been stolen during a break-in at their apartment. She described the emotional devastation of losing these irreplaceable family heirlooms, particularly a necklace and earring set that had belonged to her grandmother's mother. "I know this sounds terrible," Jessica sobbed into the phone, "but I was wondering if you might help me replace at least one piece. I found a necklace and earring set that looks exactly like the one that was stolen, and having something similar would mean the world to me. It would help me feel connected to my family again." Her voice broke as she explained that she had been having nightmares about the break-in and that replacing this jewelry might help her heal from the trauma. David called an hour later, his voice filled with anger and frustration. "Mom, Jessica is devastated about losing her grandmother's jewelry. It's the only connection she had left to her family, and now it's gone forever. We found a replacement set, but it's expensive, and we can't afford it right now. This is really important to her emotional recovery. Can't you help us with this one thing?" The pressure in his voice made it clear that refusing was not an option he would accept gracefully. The shopping trip to the jewelry store felt wrong from the moment we arrived. Jessica had researched the most expensive jewelry retailer in the city, claiming that only high-quality pieces would properly honor her grandmother's memory. The salesperson, clearly recognizing potential high-dollar customers, immediately showed us their most expensive pieces, beginning with items that cost more than most people's cars. Jessica's performance throughout the shopping experience was Academy Award worthy. She examined dozens of pieces with emotional reactions that seemed genuine, rejecting each one for not quite capturing the spirit of her lost family heirloom. When we finally reached the $8,000 necklace and earring set, her reaction was immediate and overwhelming. "Oh my goodness," she whispered, her hands trembling as she touched the display case. "This is exactly like my grandmother's set. I can't believe how similar it is. It's like fate brought us here today." The salesperson, sensing an imminent large sale, began describing the exceptional quality of the pieces and their investment potential. Jessica put on the necklace and earrings, standing in front of the mirror with tears streaming down her face. "I can feel my grandmother's presence when I wear these," she said softly. "It's like she's giving me her blessing through these beautiful pieces. This is exactly what I need to heal from losing her jewelry." My financial reality crashed down on me as I realized the impossibility of the purchase. My credit cards were already approaching their limits from previous expenses related to Jessica's crises, and my checking account couldn't cover an $8,000 purchase. When I hesitantly explained that I needed to think about such a large expense, Jessica's demeanor changed dramatically. She became hysterical, sobbing uncontrollably and accusing me of not understanding the emotional significance of replacing her stolen family jewelry. "I thought you cared about my healing process," she cried loudly enough for other customers to stare. "I thought you wanted me to feel like part of your family. But you're just like everyone else who has abandoned me in my life." Her emotional breakdown in the middle of the expensive store created a scene that attracted the attention of every employee and customer. David immediately joined the attack, calling me selfish and cheap for refusing to help his wife recover from such a traumatic loss. "She's been through enough already," he said angrily. "First she loses her family's jewelry to criminals, and now you won't help her replace something that means everything to her. I can't believe you're being so heartless about this." The public humiliation of being criticized by my own son in front of strangers added another layer of emotional manipulation to an already overwhelming situation. The ultimatum came swiftly and decisively. "If you don't buy this jewelry today," David announced loudly, "we're leaving and you'll never see us again." Jessica deserves better than this treatment from someone who claims to love her like a daughter. The threat of permanent estrangement from my only child hit me like a physical blow, leaving me gasping for breath in the middle of the jewelry store. Despite every instinct screaming that I was making a terrible mistake, I felt completely trapped by the emotional manipulation and public pressure. The fear of losing my son forever, combined with Jessica's continued sobbing and the uncomfortable stares of other customers, broke down my last defenses. Against all financial logic and personal judgment, I handed over my credit card to make the $8,000 purchase. The moment of ultimate betrayal came as we prepared to leave the store. David looked at me with what I can only describe as contempt and said, "Mom, you pay for this. We'll wait in the car." The casual cruelty in his voice as he dismissed me like hired help rather than the mother who had just spent her life savings on his wife's demands shattered something fundamental in our relationship. Jessica clutched her expensive new jewelry while David escorted her out of the store, leaving me alone to complete the transaction that would finally wake me up to the reality of my situation. Driving home from the jewelry store with the receipt that represented my financial breaking point, I felt a clarity that had been absent for months. The fog of manipulation began to lift as I realized that I had been systematically deceived by someone I had welcomed into my family with open arms. That evening, sitting at my kitchen table with all my financial statements spread before me, I began the painful process of calculating exactly how much money Jessica's manufactured crises had cost me. The total damage was staggering. Over the course of 8 months, I had given David and Jessica more than $25,000. The wedding expenses, apartment deposits, medical bills, educational costs, and numerous smaller emergencies had combined to create a financial disaster that threatened my retirement security. I had maxed out 3 credit cards, depleted 60% of my retirement savings, and taken on monthly payment obligations that exceeded my fixed income by hundreds of dollars. The investigation into Jessica's claims began with a simple phone call to verify one of her supposed medical expenses. The holistic wellness center where she claimed to have received expensive treatments had a disconnected phone number. When I researched the address online, I discovered that the building housed a luxury day spa that offered massages and beauty treatments, not the specialized medical therapies Jessica had described. This single discrepancy opened the floodgates of doubt that had been building in my subconscious for months. My research into Jessica's educational program revealed another elaborate deception. The business certification course that had cost $4,000 in tuition didn't exist at any accredited institution. The website Jessica had shown me was professionally designed but completely fraudulent, created to support her story about pursuing advanced training. When I called the phone number listed on the fake website, it connected to a voicemail service that had never been set up. Social media investigation provided the most shocking revelations about Jessica's true lifestyle and employment situation. Despite claiming to be unemployed and searching for work, her Instagram and Facebook profiles showed her working at an exclusive spa in the wealthiest part of the city. The spa's website listed her as a senior consultant, a position that typically paid $60,000 or more annually. Her social media posts also revealed expensive vacations, luxury shopping trips, and fine dining experiences that would have been impossible on the modest income she claimed to have. The pattern of Jessica's deception became even clearer as I discovered evidence of her previous relationships with older women. Her social media history showed her in photos with at least 3 different women over the age of 50, each relationship documented over several months before ending abruptly. In several posts, she thanked these women for their generosity and support during difficult times, using the same language she had employed with me. The realization that I was not Jessica's first victim, but rather the latest in a series of targeted financial exploitation schemes, filled me with a combination of rage and humiliation. My research into elder financial abuse revealed that Jessica's tactics were textbook examples of manipulation techniques used by professional scam artists. The initial charm offensive, the manufactured emergencies, the emotional blackmail, and the isolation from friends and family were all standard components of sophisticated fraud schemes designed to exploit older adults with financial resources. Reading academic articles about these crimes made me realize that I had been targeted from the moment David introduced Jessica as his girlfriend. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, provided crucial emotional support when I confided my discoveries to her. She had experienced a similar situation with her daughter's boyfriend, who had manipulated the family for financial support before disappearing with several $1,000s and valuable family jewelry. Mrs. Patterson's validation that I wasn't losing my mind or being overly suspicious gave me the strength to continue investigating and gathering evidence of Jessica's fraudulent activities. The documentation process became my obsession as I methodically recorded every financial transaction, saved every text message and email, and created a timeline of Jessica's increasingly elaborate deceptions. I opened a safety deposit box to store copies of all evidence, knowing that I would need comprehensive proof if I decided to pursue legal action or confront Jessica with her crimes. The process of organizing this evidence helped me understand the sophisticated nature of the manipulation I had endured and prepared me for the confrontations that lay ahead. The emotional processing of betrayal, anger, shame, and determination became a daily struggle as I grappled with the reality that my own son had participated in destroying my financial security. The grief over losing the relationship I thought I had with David felt almost as devastating as losing my husband. The anger at being manipulated and deceived burned through me like acid, but it also fueled my determination to expose Jessica's crimes and protect other potential victims from experiencing the same financial and emotional devastation. Armed with evidence of Jessica's deception and a growing understanding of how I had been manipulated, I decided that my first step should be a direct conversation with David. I called him on a Tuesday morning, hoping that a straightforward presentation of facts might help him see the truth about his wife's fraudulent behavior. My naive belief that evidence and logic would overcome months of psychological manipulation was quickly shattered by David's immediate and aggressive response to my accusations. "Mom, I can't believe you're making up these crazy stories about Jessica," David said before I had finished presenting even half of my evidence. "She's been nothing but loving and generous to you, and now you're attacking her character with lies and conspiracy theories. I think you might be having some senior moments, and I'm worried about your mental state." His dismissive tone and immediate defense of Jessica without considering my evidence revealed how completely he remained under her influence. When I attempted to explain the disconnected phone numbers, fake educational programs, and contradictory social media evidence, David hung up the phone without allowing me to finish. His refusal to even listen to documented proof of his wife's deception demonstrated that Jessica's psychological control over him remained absolute. The son who had once valued my wisdom and judgment now treated me like a confused elderly person whose concerns could be dismissed without serious consideration. My decision to make an unannounced visit to their apartment the following day represented a desperate attempt to force a conversation that David was clearly determined to avoid. I arrived at their expensive downtown apartment complex, a building that should have been far beyond their means given their claimed financial struggles, and knocked on their door with a folder full of evidence. Jessica answered the door with a sweet smile that immediately transformed into concern when she saw my serious expression. "Margaret, what a lovely surprise," Jessica said warmly, though I could see calculation behind her eyes as she evaluated my unexpected presence. "David just stepped out to run errands, but please come in. Can I make you some coffee?" Her attempt to maintain the loving daughter-in-law facade even while I stood on her doorstep with evidence of her crimes revealed the depth of her confidence in her manipulative abilities. Jessica's counterattack began the moment I presented the first piece of evidence about her fake medical treatments. Rather than attempt to explain the discrepancies, she immediately shifted into victim mode, expressing concern about my mental health and suggesting that I might be experiencing early symptoms of dementia. "Oh Margaret, I'm so worried about you," she said with convincing tears. "You're making connections between things that aren't really related, and I'm afraid you might be having some memory issues. Have you talked to your doctor about these concerns?" When David returned home to find me confronting Jessica with evidence of her fraudulent activities, his response exceeded even my worst expectations. He immediately believed Jessica's claims that I was experiencing cognitive decline rather than considering the possibility that his wife had been deceiving us both. "Mom, you're clearly not thinking straight," he said angrily. "Jessica has been nothing but wonderful to our family, and now you're accusing her of elaborate crimes that make no sense. I think we need to have you evaluated by a doctor." Jessica's manipulation reached new heights as she twisted every piece of evidence I presented into proof of my supposed mental deterioration. The disconnected phone number became evidence that I had written down the wrong number due to confusion. The fake educational website became proof that I didn't understand modern online learning platforms. My financial calculations became evidence that I was making mathematical errors due to cognitive decline. Her ability to reframe clear evidence of fraud into symptoms of my mental illness was both terrifying and impressive. The escalation of their defensive tactics included threats that I had never imagined would come from my own son. David informed me that if I continued to harass Jessica with false accusations, they would seek a restraining order to protect her from my unstable behavior. The legal threat from my own child felt like a knife wound to my heart, but it also revealed how far Jessica's influence had corrupted his judgment and moral compass. Jessica's campaign to destroy my credibility extended beyond our family circle as she began calling my doctor's office to express concerns about my mental state. She contacted several of my longtime friends with worried reports about my supposed confusion and paranoid thinking, effectively poisoning relationships that had sustained me through decades of friendship. Her systematic attack on my reputation demonstrated a level of strategic thinking that went far beyond simple financial fraud. The spreading rumors about my mental health began to affect my relationships with other family members who didn't have access to the evidence I had gathered. Some relatives began questioning whether my accusations against Jessica might indeed be symptoms of age-related cognitive decline rather than legitimate concerns about financial abuse. The isolation that Jessica created by undermining my credibility made me feel like I was losing my sanity, exactly as she intended. Jessica's legal threats escalated to include mentions of defamation lawsuits if I continued spreading lies about her character and professional reputation. Her confidence in making these threats suggested that she had experience with legal intimidation tactics, possibly from previous victims who had attempted to expose her fraudulent activities. The implication that I could face legal consequences for reporting crimes committed against me added another layer of psychological pressure to an already overwhelming situation. My lowest point came when I began questioning my own memories and judgment despite having documented evidence of Jessica's deception. The combination of David's betrayal, Jessica's psychological manipulation, and the erosion of my support system created a mental state where I wondered if I might indeed be experiencing the cognitive decline they claimed to observe. This self-doubt, which I later learned was a common response to sophisticated psychological manipulation, nearly prevented me from continuing to pursue the truth about Jessica's crimes. My salvation came through an unexpected ally when my nephew Tom called to check on me after hearing concerning reports about my mental health from other family members. Tom, a retired private investigator who had built his career exposing fraud and white-collar crime, immediately recognized the pattern of elder financial abuse when I described Jessica's behavior and my family's response to my concerns. His professional expertise and family loyalty provided exactly the validation and support I needed to continue fighting for the truth. Aunt Margaret, everything you're describing sounds like a textbook case of financial exploitation, Tom said after listening to my complete story. The manufactured emergencies, the isolation tactics, the gaslighting about your mental health, these are all standard techniques used by professional con artists. You're not losing your mind, you're the victim of a sophisticated criminal operation. His words provided the first genuine relief I had felt in months as my own family questioned my sanity. Tom's professional investigation into Jessica's background revealed a criminal history that exceeded even my worst suspicions. She had used multiple aliases over the past decade, targeting vulnerable older women in 3 different states before moving to our city. Her criminal record included convictions for fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse in states where previous victims had possessed the resources and determination to pursue legal action. The pattern of her crimes showed increasing sophistication as she learned from each successful exploitation. The network of Jessica's previous victims that Tom uncovered through his investigation revealed the systematic nature of her criminal enterprise. Each victim shared remarkably similar experiences: the initial charm offensive, the gradual integration into family systems, the manufactured emergencies requiring financial assistance, and the eventual complete financial devastation. Several victims had lost their entire life savings before discovering the truth about Jessica's deception, and most had also experienced the same gaslighting tactics that made them question their own mental competence. Jessica's documented modus operandi showed that she specifically targeted widowed or divorced women over 50 who had adult children and visible financial resources. She would typically enter their lives through romantic relationships with their sons or by befriending them directly in social settings where affluent older women gathered. Her research phase could last several weeks as she gathered information about their financial situation, family dynamics, and emotional vulnerabilities before beginning the systematic exploitation process. The evidence collection phase of our investigation required sophisticated techniques to document Jessica's ongoing fraudulent activities without alerting her to our suspicions. Tom installed hidden cameras in my home and provided me with recording equipment to capture any future conversations where Jessica might admit to her deceptive practices. We also worked with a forensic accountant to create a comprehensive analysis of all financial transactions related to Jessica's supposed emergencies and needs. My consultation with an attorney who specialized in elder abuse cases provided crucial information about my legal options for recovering the stolen money and holding Jessica accountable for her crimes. The lawyer explained that financial exploitation of elderly persons was a felony in our state, punishable by significant prison time and requiring full restitution to victims. However, successful prosecution would require substantial evidence and cooperation from law enforcement agencies that were sometimes reluctant to pursue complex financial crimes. The planning phase for exposing Jessica's criminal activities required careful coordination to avoid giving her an opportunity to destroy evidence or flee before authorities could act. Tom designed a sting operation using the promise of a substantial inheritance as bait to record Jessica admitting to her systematic manipulation of older women. The plan required me to convince Jessica that I had recently learned about a previously unknown inheritance from my late husband's estate, money that would soon be available to help with their ongoing financial needs. The psychological preparation for confronting Jessica with evidence of her crimes required extensive emotional support as I struggled with feelings of betrayal, anger, and shame about being victimized. Tom connected me with support groups for elder abuse survivors, where I learned that my experience was unfortunately common and that my emotional responses were normal reactions to sophisticated psychological manipulation. These connections with other survivors provided strength and validation that proved crucial during the investigation phase. Family dynamics shifted as some relatives began supporting my efforts to expose Jessica's crimes while others remained convinced that I was experiencing mental decline. Tom's involvement as a professional investigator helped establish credibility for my accusations, but David and his immediate supporters continued defending Jessica despite mounting evidence of her criminal behavior. The family divisions created by Jessica's manipulation would prove to have lasting consequences regardless of the investigation's outcome. The breakthrough moment came when Tom's surveillance equipment captured Jessica making phone calls to potential new victims, using the same scripts and emotional manipulation techniques she had employed with me. Her recorded conversations revealed the calculated nature of her criminal enterprise and provided prosecutors with evidence of ongoing criminal activity beyond the financial exploitation she had already committed against me. These recordings would prove crucial in building a case that could result in significant prison time for her systematic financial crimes. The comprehensive evidence package that Tom and I assembled included financial records, recorded conversations, witness statements from previous victims, and documentation of Jessica's false identity claims and fraudulent employment history. This evidence demonstrated not just the financial damage Jessica had caused to me personally, but the pattern of criminal behavior that had victimized multiple older women across several states over many years. The scope of her criminal enterprise far exceeded what any of us had initially suspected when we began the investigation. The carefully orchestrated confrontation required weeks of preparation and coordination with law enforcement to ensure that Jessica would be arrested immediately after admitting to her crimes. Tom worked with local police and prosecutors to obtain warrants and establish surveillance around my home where the final confrontation would take place. I invited David and Jessica for what I described as an important family announcement about a recently discovered inheritance from Robert's estate, bait that I knew Jessica would find irresistible. Jessica arrived at my house with barely contained excitement about the promised inheritance news, her eyes bright with anticipation of accessing another source of financial exploitation. She hugged me warmly and commented on how much better I seemed since our last difficult conversation, subtly reinforcing her narrative that my previous accusations had been symptoms of mental confusion rather than legitimate concerns about her behavior. David appeared uncomfortable but supportive, clearly hoping that this family meeting would repair the relationship damage caused by my false accusations against his wife. The revelation began when I calmly informed them that there was no inheritance, but that I had discovered the complete truth about Jessica's criminal activities and systematic financial exploitation of older women. I produced the comprehensive evidence file that Tom and I had assembled, including Jessica's criminal history, documentation of her previous victims, and proof that every emergency requiring my financial assistance had been completely fabricated. The color drained from Jessica's face as she realized the extent of our investigation. Jessica's initial response was complete denial, claiming that the evidence had been fabricated or manipulated to frame her for crimes she had never committed. She accused Tom of creating false documents and suggested that I was paying him to construct an elaborate conspiracy against her because I was jealous of her relationship with David. Her desperation became apparent as she frantically tried to maintain the victim persona that had protected her throughout months of financial exploitation. The recorded confession that sealed Jessica's fate came when Tom played audio of her phone conversations with potential new victims, conversations where she had used identical scripts and emotional manipulation techniques that I recognized from my own experience. Her voice on the recording was unmistakably discussing strategies for identifying and exploiting lonely old ladies with money, who could be manipulated into providing financial support for manufactured emergencies and fabricated personal crises. David's reaction to hearing his wife's recorded voice discussing criminal strategies against elderly women was a mixture of shock, horror, and complete disbelief. For months, he had defended Jessica against my accusations and attacked my credibility, but the audio evidence of her criminal intent was impossible to dismiss or rationalize. The moment when he finally understood that his wife was a professional con artist who had targeted his family represented the complete collapse of everything he believed about their relationship. The full scope of Jessica's deception emerged as she realized that denial was no longer possible and began admitting to the systematic nature of her crimes. She confessed to targeting me from the moment she learned about my financial resources, fabricating every emergency that had required money, and manipulating David's emotions to ensure his cooperation with her exploitation scheme. Her confession revealed that she had never loved either of us, but had seen us only as sources of income to support her lifestyle and criminal enterprise. Jessica's admission that she had previous victims and that financial exploitation of older women was her primary source of income demonstrated the professional nature of her criminal activities. She explained her techniques for identifying vulnerable targets, building emotional relationships to establish trust, and systematically draining their financial resources before moving to new victims in different cities. Her casual discussion of destroying the lives of multiple older women revealed a level of callousness that shocked even experienced investigators. David's complete breakdown upon realizing the extent of his unwitting participation in his mother's financial exploitation was heartbreaking to witness. He had genuinely believed in Jessica's love and had trusted her explanations for every emergency that required my financial assistance. The revelation that he had been manipulated into pressuring me to provide money for fabricated crises filled him with guilt and shame that would take years to process and overcome. Family relationships that had been damaged by Jessica's manipulation began to realign as the truth about her criminal activities became undeniable. Relatives who had questioned my mental health acknowledged their mistakes and offered support, while those who had defended Jessica found themselves grappling with their own susceptibility to her manipulative techniques. The family divisions created by her exploitation would require significant time and effort to repair completely. The legal intervention proceeded exactly as Tom and law enforcement had planned, with police arriving at my home with arrest warrants just as Jessica finished confessing to her systematic financial crimes. Her arrest on charges of elder abuse, fraud, and identity theft provided a sense of justice, but it could not immediately repair the financial and emotional damage her crimes had caused to me and my family relationships. Community impact from Jessica's arrest and the revelation of her systematic targeting of older women created awareness about elder financial abuse that had previously been lacking in our affluent neighborhood. Local news coverage of her case helped educate other potential victims about manipulation techniques and warning signs, potentially protecting other families from experiencing similar financial and emotional devastation. The media attention surrounding Jessica's arrest brought forward additional victims who had been afraid to report her crimes or who had been convinced by her gaslighting techniques that they were experiencing mental decline rather than being systematically exploited. The growing number of victims and the total amount of money involved in her criminal enterprise ensured that she would face serious federal charges with substantial prison sentences upon conviction. The legal resolution of Jessica's case provided a measure of justice that helped begin my emotional healing process, though it could never fully repair the financial and relational damage her crimes had caused. Jessica ultimately pleaded guilty to multiple charges of elder abuse, fraud, and identity theft across 3 states, receiving a 15-year prison sentence and an order to pay restitution to all identified victims. Through asset forfeiture and her plea agreement, I was able to recover approximately 40% of the money she had stolen from me, though the remaining losses significantly impacted my retirement security. The partial financial recovery required careful planning with a financial counselor to rebuild my economic stability within the constraints of reduced savings and accumulated debt. I was forced to downsize from my family home to a smaller apartment and take on part-time consulting work to supplement my reduced retirement income. The financial counseling process helped me understand how professional criminals exploit the trust and generosity of older adults, and I learned to implement safeguards that would protect me from future financial manipulation. David's journey toward healing and rebuilding our relationship required extensive therapy to help him understand how he had been manipulated and to process his guilt about participating in my financial exploitation. His therapist specialized in helping victims of psychological manipulation, and through months of sessions, David began to understand the sophisticated techniques Jessica had used to control his thoughts and actions. The process of rebuilding trust between us was slow and required establishing new communication patterns and boundaries that would protect both of us from future manipulation. My personal growth through therapy focused on processing the trauma of betrayal, manipulation, and financial exploitation while rebuilding my self-confidence and trust in my own judgment. The psychological impact of being systematically deceived by someone I had welcomed as a daughter was profound, affecting my ability to form new relationships and trust my instincts about other people's motivations. Through therapy, I learned to recognize manipulation techniques and developed strategies for protecting myself emotionally while remaining open to genuine relationships. The transformation of my pain into purpose came when I decided to become an advocate for other elder abuse survivors and to educate communities about the warning signs of financial exploitation. I began speaking at senior centers, community groups, and law enforcement training sessions about my experience and the techniques criminals use to target older adults. Sharing my story helped other victims realize they were not alone and encouraged them to report crimes that they had previously been too ashamed to acknowledge. My community education efforts focused on teaching older adults and their families about the sophisticated manipulation techniques used by financial predators like Jessica. I developed presentations that explained the emotional manipulation, isolation tactics, and psychological pressure used to exploit vulnerable adults, helping audiences understand that victimization by professional criminals was not a reflection of intelligence or personal weakness. These educational programs helped protect other families from experiencing similar financial and emotional devastation. The rebuilding of family relationships damaged by Jessica's manipulation required patience, forgiveness, and commitment from all family members to acknowledge the impact of her systematic deception. Some relatives who had questioned my mental health during Jessica's campaign against my credibility struggled with guilt about their lack of support during my victimization. Family therapy sessions helped us understand how sophisticated manipulation can affect entire family systems and developed strategies for recognizing and resisting similar threats in the future. My support network expanded to include other survivors of elder financial abuse who understood the unique challenges of recovering from systematic exploitation by trusted individuals. These relationships provided emotional validation and practical advice about rebuilding financial security and personal relationships after victimization. The shared experience of surviving professional criminals created bonds that proved more supportive than relationships with people who had never experienced such systematic betrayal and manipulation. The financial recovery process required creativity and determination as I explored various options for supplementing my reduced retirement income and rebuilding my savings. I returned to part-time nursing work, providing private care for elderly patients whose families appreciated my understanding of elder abuse issues. The additional income helped stabilize my finances while allowing me to use my professional skills and personal experience to help other vulnerable older adults avoid victimization. The wisdom gained through surviving Jessica's systematic financial exploitation fundamentally changed my understanding of trust, family relationships, and personal boundaries. I learned to distinguish between genuine emergencies requiring family support and manufactured crises designed to exploit emotional connections for financial gain. The experience taught me that healthy relationships are built on mutual respect and genuine care rather than constant financial demands and emotional manipulation tactics. My perspective on aging and vulnerability evolved as I recognized that being targeted by professional criminals was not a sign of weakness or diminished capacity, but rather an indication that predators recognized my financial resources and generous nature. This realization helped me maintain confidence in my judgment while developing better protective strategies for future relationships. I learned that wisdom comes not from avoiding all risks, but from understanding how to assess and manage risks while remaining open to genuine human connections. The hope for future relationships built on authentic foundations rather than exploitative motives became a driving force in my continued healing and growth. While Jessica's betrayal initially made me suspicious of all new relationships, therapy and time helped me develop the ability to distinguish between genuine interest in my well-being and calculated attempts to exploit my resources. I learned to value relationships that offered mutual support and honest communication over those that required constant financial assistance or emotional crisis management. The strength I discovered through surviving and exposing Jessica's criminal enterprise exceeded what I had believed possible before this experience tested my resolve and judgment. The process of investigating her crimes, gathering evidence, and ultimately seeing justice served revealed personal capabilities and determination that I hadn't known I possessed. This newfound strength became a foundation for helping other victims and for building a new life focused on meaningful relationships and community service. The transformation from victim to advocate represents the most positive outcome of my devastating experience with financial exploitation, as my pain became a source of education and protection for other vulnerable adults. Through speaking engagements, support groups, and community education programs, I was able to help other families recognize and resist the manipulation techniques that had proved so effective against my family. The knowledge that my suffering helped protect others from similar victimization provided meaning and purpose that made my recovery process worthwhile. As I reflect on this painful chapter of my life, I want to ask you some important questions. Have you or someone you love ever experienced manipulation by someone you trusted completely? What warning signs do you think you would recognize if a family member was being systematically exploited by someone claiming to love them? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, as your insights might help other viewers recognize dangerous situations before it's too late. If this story resonated with you or opened your eyes to the reality of elder financial abuse, please hit that like button to help spread awareness about these devastating crimes. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true stories that shed light on important issues affecting families across the country. Share this video with family members who might benefit from understanding how professional criminals target older adults and their families. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story and for caring enough about elder abuse prevention to watch until the end. I hope that by sharing my painful experience, I can help protect other families from the financial and emotional devastation that Jessica's criminal enterprise brought to my life. Remember that asking questions, trusting your instincts, and seeking support when something doesn't feel right are not signs of suspicion or unfriendliness, but rather important protective strategies for maintaining your security and well-being. Stay safe, stay aware, and never hesitate to seek help when you need it most.